In Hollywood history, few movies have created as powerful and complex an impact as Gone with the Wind. Behind the grand shots and classic performances lies an ambitious production journey, difficult decisions, and little-known stories of the people who created this masterpiece. From the bold vision of David O. Selznick, Vivien Leigh's journey to becoming Scarlett O'Hara, to the quiet contributions behind the camera, each figure left a distinct mark. Let's explore the story behind one of the most legendary films in cinema history. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next fascinating Hollywood stories. In 1939, when audiences first saw the city of Atlanta engulfed in flames on the big screen, they were witnessing one of the most ambitious scenes Hollywood had ever filmed. But behind that moment was a bold decision by producer David O. Selznick, a man who believed that a special movie needed to begin with an unforgettable image for the audience. Selznick didn't just want to adapt a famous novel into a film, he wanted to create a work of a scale far exceeding the ordinary movies of that era. That is why he took major risks, using thousands of people during production, investing heavily in Technicolor technology, and even demolishing old movie sets to create the burning of Atlanta. When the scene was shot, the role of Scarlett O'Hara still had no official lead actress, showing his level of determination in prioritizing image and the overall vision of the film. However, great ambition also brought immense pressure. Selznick was famous for being a producer who tightly controlled every detail, from the script and acting to scene staging.
And he had forgotten more about the movie business than anybody ever knew. Inspired me to keep moving cameras and do this.
During the making of Gone with the Wind, the film went through many personnel changes, including replacing the director and several script revisions. For Selznick, every frame had to be worthy of the huge investment he had poured in. What made Selznick's story special wasn't that he was perfect or easy to work with. In fact, his working style often created a lot of tension among the film crew.
She was then at the end of her life. Her white hair was down to her waist. So pleased to see my father.
So you're smiling. You have real fond memories of coming here as a kid and seeing all.
But it was precisely that perseverance and vision that helped shape a movie whose influence lasted for decades. David O. Selznick didn't just produce Gone with the Wind. He built a cinematic dream, an ambitious, complex, and challenging project that ultimately became one of the most important milestones in Hollywood history. Before becoming Scarlett O'Hara, Vivien Leigh was not the choice most people in Hollywood first thought of. At the time David O. Selznick was searching for an actress for the film's most important role, thousands of candidates were considered. Many believed that the character of Scarlett, a strong and spunky Southern American girl, should be portrayed by an American actress. Vivien Leigh, a British actress, seemed not to fit those expectations. But instead of viewing her background as an obstacle, she saw it as an opportunity to prove her ability. During the months-long Hollywood search for Scarlett O'Hara, Leigh prepared meticulously and waited for the right moment to express herself. The game-changing moment occurred when Leigh was introduced to David O. Selznick on the set of the Atlanta fire scene. For many, it was a surprising choice, but her subsequent performance proved that a great role depends not just on an actor's origin, but on the ability to truly understand the character. Scarlett O'Hara is a complex character. She is strong and decisive, yet has her own flaws and contradictions. Vivien Leigh brought multiple layers of emotion to this character, helping Scarlett become one of the most memorable female icons of 20th century cinema. The role earned Leigh the Oscar for Best Actress and completely transformed her standing in the film industry. But behind that halo was a journey requiring preparation, dealing with pressure, and overcoming initial prejudices. Vivien Leigh's story is not just about a successful role. It's the story of an actress who stepped into one of Hollywood's biggest projects and proved that talent can transcend the limits set by others. For many years prior to joining Gone with the Wind, Clark Gable was considered one of Hollywood's biggest stars. With a powerful, confident, and charismatic image, he was dubbed the King of Hollywood by audiences. So when the role of Rhett Butler was assigned to him,
I think it's hard winning a war with words, gentlemen.
What do you mean, sir? What difference does that make, sir, to a gentleman?
I'm afraid it's going to make a great deal of difference to a great...
Many viewed it as a near-perfect casting choice. But behind that on-screen confidence was a decision that was anything but simple. Gable understood that Rhett Butler was a character with massive influence in Margaret Mitchell's novel.
Turn around. Oh, you look good enough to eat.
Everybody's doing well at Tara, only I got so bored, I just thought I'd treat myself to...
If he failed to deliver, the role could become a heavy burden on his career. One of Gable's biggest challenges was the scene where Rhett Butler shows vulnerability and deep emotion. This went against the strong male image he had built for years. Gable initially didn't want to show weakness too clearly in front of the camera because he feared it might affect his persona. However, after being persuaded by the director and his co-stars, he decided to try a different approach.
Clark, nice to see you.
How are you?
Well, aren't you surprised to find me in Rome?
Yeah, sometimes you even see an Italian.
That certainly applies to her. She just got back.
Ultimately, those emotional moments became a memorable part of his performance. What's interesting about Clark Gable is that he wasn't just playing Rhett Butler. He had to confront his own fame. The more famous a star is, the greater the pressure to prove oneself. Gable's performance eventually became one of the most famous roles of his career, and the story behind Rhett Butler shows that even Hollywood's biggest icons have to overcome doubt and challenges to create memorable moments. Before becoming one of the most famous films in movie history, Gone with the Wind started as a novel by Margaret Mitchell. She was the creator of the world of Scarlett O'Hara, Rhett Butler, and the characters who would become iconic on screen many years later. When the book was published in 1936, it quickly became a literary phenomenon. Its immense success immediately caught Hollywood's attention to adapt the story into a movie. However, Margaret Mitchell took a different approach compared to many other famous authors. She did not want to be a central part of the film production process. Mitchell sold the rights to her work to David O. Selznick, but kept her distance from decisions made behind the camera. She declined to participate in writing the screenplay and let Hollywood resolve the challenges of turning a massive novel into a long feature film. This created a fascinating contrast. The creator of the story was not the one controlling its cinematic version. Hollywood had its own way of telling it, making choices regarding actors, script, and visuals that differed at times from the author's original imagination. Margaret Mitchell's legacy therefore lies not just in writing a successful story. She created a work that continues to be discussed across generations, from its literary value and cinematic influence to debates on how history is portrayed on screen. Her story shows that sometimes an author can create a world that transcends their own time, and then watch that world be interpreted in many different ways. But before we continue exploring the behind-the-scenes stories of Gone with the Wind, take a moment to share your thoughts. In your opinion, is the success of a movie determined more by the author who wrote the story or by the people who turned it into a film? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. We'd love to know your perspective. If you enjoy stories about the people who shaped Hollywood history, don't forget to hit like to support the channel, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future videos about characters, movies, and stories behind the spotlight of the entertainment industry. On a February night in 1940 at the 12th Academy Awards, American film history witnessed a special moment. When Hattie McDaniel's name was called for Best Supporting Actress, she became the first African American to win an Oscar statue. But behind that moment of glory was a story reflecting the social limitations that she and many black artists faced at the time. In Gone with the Wind, Hattie McDaniel played Mammy, the woman who cared for the O'Hara family and one of the most prominent characters in the movie. Her performance earned recognition for her ability to portray a character with personality, intelligence, and loyalty. However, the role's success also occurred in a complex context, as Hollywood in the 1930s was still heavily influenced by racial prejudices. Even on the night she received her historic award, McDaniel couldn't fully enjoy the moment like many of her colleagues. The Oscar ceremony took place at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, which had restrictions on black guests. Thanks to the intervention of David O. Selznick, she was allowed to attend, but still had to sit separately from her co-stars. Selznick, she was allowed to attend, but still had to sit separately from her fellow actors. Nevertheless, Hattie McDaniel took the stage with dignity and pride. Her acceptance speech expressed gratitude to the Academy and hoped that this success would open up more opportunities for black artists in the film industry. Hattie McDaniel's story is not just about an award. It is the story of an artist who made a significant mark in Hollywood history, and it shows the changing journey of the film industry across generations. When mentioning Gone with the Wind, many viewers remember the emotional clash between Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler. But alongside those two central characters, Olivia de Havilland delivered one of the movie's most vital performances through the role of Melanie Hamilton Wilkes. Unlike Scarlett, who always sought to control her circumstances and fight for what she wanted, Melanie was a gentler character, built on kindness and steadfastness.
Bells.
And she took them in.
She's by way of being...
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I couldn't think up a more dignified alibi.
This was also a challenge for Olivia de Havilland, as she needed to create a character who wasn't overly dramatic in action, yet remained memorable to the audience. What was remarkable is that during production, de Havilland didn't just focus on her own role. She also played a key role in several acting decisions for the film. One of the most frequently mentioned stories is how she encouraged Clark Gable to execute the scene where Rhett Butler shows stronger emotion, rather than just maintaining the persona of a man who is always in control. Olivia de Havilland's career after Gone with the Wind continued to flourish. She became one of classic Hollywood's most notable actresses, and won 2 Oscars in her later career. What makes Olivia de Havilland's story memorable is that she was not the most attention-grabbing character at first, but through subtlety in acting, she proved that impactful characters don't always need to be the ones with the most screen time. In the eyes of many modern viewers, Ashley Wilkes is one of the important characters in Gone with the Wind. But for Leslie Howard, who took on this role, it was not an opportunity he truly desired at first. At the time of joining the film, Howard was already 46 years old, while the character of Ashley Wilkes in the novel was written much younger. This age gap was one of the reasons he felt he wasn't completely right for the role. Additionally, Howard was not particularly fond of Ashley, who was viewed as calm, idealist, and somewhat passive compared to other strong characters in the story. According to production documents, Leslie Howard initially didn't want to accept the role and hadn't even read the novel before joining the project. He only agreed after reaching a deal involving another film project he was interested in.
Were born and nourished here. And your fathers, they are our inheritance from the past.
However, after the movie was completed, Howard's performance remained a key piece of the overall narrative. Ashley Wilkes represented an old world undergoing change, a character caught between traditional values and new realities of life. The interesting thing in Leslie Howard's story is that it shows not every famous role starts with an actor's enthusiasm. Sometimes, complex career choices leave a longer-lasting impact than initial expectations. Before Vivien Leigh became Scarlett O'Hara, many famous actresses had been considered for the role. Among them, Katharine Hepburn was a special name. Unlike many who merely waited for an audition invitation, Hepburn actively expressed her desire to play this famous character. With her strong personality and natural confidence, Hepburn believed she could bring a fitting interpretation to Scarlett. She once campaigned directly for the role and received support from director George Cukor, who had worked with her previously.
I want to ask you if you could give me a lesson every day right off.
But
I want to play, well, for a certain length of time. But I'd plan to go to the best teacher I could find.
However, David O. Selznick had different thoughts. He felt that Hepburn, though a talented actress, was not right for the image of Scarlett he was seeking. Part of the reason was commercial, as Hepburn was going through a rough patch in her career at the time and had been labeled box office poison by some in the industry. Additionally, Selznick felt Hepburn's image didn't create the necessary contrast with Rhett Butler, something he deemed vital to the romance in the film. In the end, the role of Scarlett went to Vivien Leigh, and film history took a completely different turn. But Katharine Hepburn's story remains an interesting part of the casting process of Gone with the Wind. It demonstrates that even Hollywood's biggest stars can miss out on iconic roles, and sometimes a single casting decision can completely alter how the world remembers a film. Before continuing to explore the behind-the-scenes stories of creating Gone with the Wind, share your thoughts on an interesting question. If Katharine Hepburn had been cast as Scarlett O'Hara, do you think the movie would have become a completely different work? Leave a comment and let us know your choice. Every audience perspective makes for engaging conversations about film history. If you love untold stories behind classic Hollywood movies, don't forget to hit like to support the channel, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to not miss upcoming videos. There is something quite special in the history of Gone with the Wind. One of the people who understood the film's characters the longest was not the most remembered when the work debuted. Before cameras started capturing the image of Scarlett O'Hara, George Cukor spent considerable time building the foundation for the movie. He was chosen by David O. Selznick to lead the project during its most critical phase, turning a long, complex novel into a cinematic story with depth.
I shot, I think, the first 1 or 2 reels. I really, for a year, I made the tests and the thing. I think David Selznick.
Cukor was famous for his ability to work with actors, especially in exploring multi-layered characters. To him, Scarlett was not just a strong woman trying to survive amidst historical upheavals. She was also a character with weaknesses, contradictions, and tough choices. During preparation, Cukor helped shape how the actors approached their characters. He focused on facial expressions, psychology, and relationships between characters, rather than just creating grand spectacle moments. However, behind the collaboration between a performance-driven director and a producer with a very specific vision like Selznick were inevitable differences. When principal photography began, differences in creative approach grew clearer, leading to Cukor's departure from the project. Though he didn't stay with the film until premiere day, George Cukor's influence endured in the way the characters were constructed. He was an essential part of the early stage, where a story on paper began finding its shape on screen. Not many directors accepted a task as difficult as Victor Fleming did in 1939. He did not start from a blank page. He stepped into a project that already carried fame, pressure, and huge expectations from audiences. When Fleming was invited to join Gone with the Wind, the film had undergone months of preparation and changes. What he received was not just the director position, but the responsibility to complete a work that Hollywood was placing great expectations on. Fleming was an experienced director capable of handling big projects. But Gone with the Wind was a different kind of challenge. The film had a massive production scale, thousands of participants, and a producer who closely tracked every detail. One of Fleming's greatest difficulties was balancing Selznick's vision with the creative role of a director. He had to make decisions in an environment where every frame was scrutinized. However, what made Fleming's mark was not just completing the movie. More importantly, he helped connect disparate elements, acting, imagery, storytelling pace, into a cohesive masterpiece. That same year, Fleming also directed The Wizard of Oz, creating one of the most successful years of his career. But in cinema history, Victor Fleming's name will always be tied to the moment he brought Gone with the Wind across the finish line after a turbulent journey. In stories about classic films, the spotlight usually shines on those at the top, but for a massive project to survive, it sometimes needs people who step up at the most difficult times. Sam Wood was one such figure in the journey of Gone with the Wind. He isn't the director most mentioned when audiences talk about the film, but his involvement came during a crucial stage of production. When the movie experienced personnel changes, Sam Wood was brought in to help maintain momentum. This was a task requiring flexibility, as he had to work within a project that already possessed its own style, team, and high demands. Unlike building a movie from scratch, stepping in midway through a major project is its own challenge. A director needs to understand what was created before, while ensuring the production continues running smoothly. Sam Wood brought the professionalism and experience of a veteran Hollywood director. His contribution lay not in flashy backstage anecdotes, but in his ability to keep a complex project moving forward. Film history sometimes remembers those who create the most famous moments, but it also needs to recognize those who helped make those moments possible. A successful novel isn't always easy to turn into a successful film. With Gone with the Wind, the biggest challenge wasn't a lack of material, but having too much to tell. When Ben Hecht joined the script rewriting process, he faced a special task: finding a way to preserve the spirit of Margaret Mitchell's story while converting it into a film with clear pacing. Hecht was one of the most famous Hollywood screenwriters of that era. He had expertise in crafting dialogue and story structure, but even with that talent, Gone with the Wind remained a massive hurdle. A long novel with many characters, historical events, and emotional arcs cannot be transferred intact onto the screen. Thus, Hecht's job wasn't just rewriting dialogue, but deciding what needed to be kept so audiences could feel the spirit of the source material. During production, he worked at high speed to help resolve script issues. This serves as a prime example showing that behind famous movies, there are always creative struggles taking place before the cameras roll. Ben Hecht's name didn't appear on the film poster, but his contributions formed part of the foundation of the story millions of viewers came to know. When audiences remember Gone with the Wind, they usually think of Scarlett O'Hara, Rhett Butler, or the grand scenes on screen. But before those characters appeared in movie theaters, the story had to go through another journey on paper, where several writers tried to turn a massive novel into a screenplay. One of the names involved in that process was F. Scott Fitzgerald, famous author of The Great Gatsby. Around the time Hollywood sought to adapt Gone with the Wind, Fitzgerald was invited to work on the script. This was a notable opportunity, as he was one of the most famous American writers of his generation. However, turning a novel hundreds of pages long into a movie was no easy task, even for a talented writer. Margaret Mitchell's story had too many characters, events, and historical details, whereas cinema required a more condensed narrative. Fitzgerald participated in script development, but ultimately wasn't credited in the official film release. His contributions became a small part of a larger creative process, where various screenwriters together tried to find the best version for the screen.
And the Commodore Hotel for drunkenness. Another time, Zelda, we were pretty wild.
What's remarkable about Fitzgerald's story isn't that he created the final version of the film, but that one of America's greatest writers faced the same challenge many other writers encounter: how to adapt a literary work into a cinematic experience. His story is a reminder that behind a classic movie aren't just those who appear on screen. There were big names who contributed to that process, even if their mark sometimes remains only in archival records. In 1939, Hollywood didn't just face the question of how to create an engaging film. Filmmakers also had to answer another question: whether the movie could pass strict censorship regulations. At the center of this process was Joseph Breen, head of the Production Code Administration, the agency responsible for overseeing film content in Hollywood at the time. For Gone with the Wind, Breen and the censorship board had to review many elements, from character relationships to potentially controversial lines of dialogue. One of the most famous examples was Rhett Butler's line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." At the time, certain words in this line were deemed inappropriate for film standards. David O. Selznick had to find ways to prove that keeping this line was necessary to reflect the true spirit of the story. Joseph Breen's role showed that Golden Age Hollywood wasn't as completely free in creative expression as many assume. Filmmakers had to work within a complex rule system where every dialogue and scene could become a subject of debate. However, this story also reflects the evolution of cinema over time. Things that raised controversy in 1939 are now viewed within a broader historical context. Joseph Breen wasn't a figure in front of the spotlights, but he represented a force with immense influence over how Hollywood told stories for decades. Not every debate surrounding Gone with the Wind took place on the soundstage. Just before the movie debuted, voices were already questioning how the work depicted American history. One of those who spoke up was Walter White, Executive Secretary of the NAACP, an organization fighting for civil rights for African Americans. White expressed concern that the film might present an overly romanticized view of the Civil War South while downplaying the painful and complex aspects related to slavery. These viewpoints emerged while the film was still in production, showing that debates over historical storytelling didn't just start decades later. David O. Selznick made some adjustments during production, including removing certain controversial elements from the script. Nevertheless, discussions surrounding the movie continued across generations. Walter White's story offers a different perspective on Gone with the Wind. A movie can be highly praised for technical skill, acting, and scale, yet simultaneously remain a subject of discussion regarding how it reflects society and history. White's role was not in creating the film, but in asking important questions about the responsibility of art when recounting complex eras of the past. Sometimes important figures in a movie aren't the ones who appear in the frame. With Gone with the Wind, Carole Lombard is one such example. Before Clark Gable became Rhett Butler, he was already one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but behind his decision to take on this famous role were personal factors in his life, particularly his relationship with Carole Lombard. At the time, Gable and Lombard were one of Hollywood's famous celebrity couples. Gable's personal life was undergoing significant changes, and participating in a massive project like Gone with the Wind tied into career and financial decisions. Interestingly, Rhett Butler later became one of the most iconic roles of Gable's career, but initially he was not completely certain he wanted to play the character. The pressure from the novel's fame and audience expectations made the choice more complicated. Carole Lombard was not a direct part of the film's production, but her story shows that major career decisions for Hollywood stars are sometimes influenced by life outside the studio. Behind a historic role are not just scripts and cameras. Sometimes there are personal choices, relationships, and life moments that help shape an artist's direction. And that's part of what makes the behind-the-scenes story of Gone with the Wind so special. The movie was built not just by what audiences saw on screen, but by many stories happening behind it. What do you think about the influence of loved ones on Hollywood stars' careers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to continue exploring the stories behind legendary movies and the people who made Hollywood's golden age, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to join us in upcoming videos. Before the name Scarlett O'Hara became tied to Vivien Leigh, the British actress was standing at a major turning point in her career, and during that critical period, Laurence Olivier was one of the figures with significant influence on her journey. In 1938, as Hollywood began paying attention to Vivien Leigh, she was in the US while Laurence Olivier was filming Wuthering Heights. At the time, Olivier was already a renowned stage actor in Britain and gradually building his position in international cinema. The relationship between the two was not just a personal story, but linked to a period of major change in Leigh's career. Appearing in Hollywood, preparing for Scarlett O'Hara, and entering one of the era's biggest projects was a very different challenge from the stage environment she was accustomed to. What's remarkable is that Vivien Leigh didn't come to Gone with the Wind relying solely on fame or luck. She had to prove that a British actress could embody a character deeply rooted in American Southern culture. On that journey, her acting foundation and stage experience played crucial roles. Laurence Olivier later became one of the greatest names in British performing arts. He and Leigh had a long-standing relationship, sharing successes and career hurdles together.
Nor bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the guide.
Though Olivier wasn't directly involved in producing Gone with the Wind, his story shows that key figures in an artist's path don't necessarily appear in a film's credits. Behind the moment Vivien Leigh became Scarlett O'Hara was a long path of preparation, relationships, and choices that helped guide her to one of the most famous roles in film history. In a movie remembered for gorgeous dresses, vast landscapes, and the distinctive colors of early Technicolor, there were people who helped craft the characters' appearances whom audiences rarely saw. Monty Westmore was one of the makeup artists behind the look of Gone with the Wind. As a famous Hollywood makeup artist, he was responsible for helping actors achieve the right appearance for their characters. For Scarlett O'Hara, every detail of appearance mattered. The character needed to show youthfulness and charm while fitting the historical setting. In an era when color film technology was still developing, creating a consistent look on screen was no simple task. One frequently mentioned detail was Scarlett's eye color. In Margaret Mitchell's novel, the character has striking green eyes, whereas Vivien Leigh's natural eye color differed. The makeup and camera crew had to use various techniques to achieve the effect desired for the film. Monty Westmore's work showed that filmmaking isn't created solely by acting and scripts. A memorable character also requires the harmony of dozens of backstage elements: lighting, costumes, makeup, and how they all fit together. Today, audiences usually remember Scarlett O'Hara through her personality and story, but the image seen on screen was also the result of quiet dedication from backstage artists like Monty Westmore. When audiences watch the grand scenes in Gone with the Wind, they usually focus on the main actors and the unfolding drama. But behind those moments were people carrying out jobs requiring specialized skills. Yakima Canutt was one of early Hollywood's most famous stuntmen. He was known for performing complex action scenes and helping pioneer safety techniques in the film industry. During the filming of the Atlanta fire scene, one of the movie's most iconic sequences, Knut acted as Clark Gable's stunt double. At the time, the scene used large-scale practical effects, requiring careful preparation to ensure safety. A stunt performer's job wasn't just performing dangerous maneuvers in place of lead actors. They needed to understand camera movement, character acting, and how to create realism while controlling risks. Yakima Knut was later considered a major influence on the art of stunt performance in Hollywood. The techniques he developed helped shape how action scenes were executed for decades after. In the story of Gone with the Wind, he wasn't the face on the poster or first in audience memories, but his contributions proved that a massive film always needs many people behind the scenes to create unforgettable moments. Amid Scarlett O'Hara's struggles, war turmoil, and complex relationships in Gone with the Wind, Thomas Mitchell brought a character with a special role, Gerald O'Hara, Scarlett's father. Unlike central figures often brought up when discussing the film, Gerald O'Hara didn't drive the entire narrative. However, his presence helped audiences better understand the origin, family, and values that shaped Scarlett. Thomas Mitchell was already an experienced actor in Hollywood when joining the film. He was famous for bringing depth to characters, often blending humor, warmth, and genuine emotion. As Gerald O'Hara, Mitchell portrayed a father who was strong yet affectionate. This character represented a generation watching their familiar world transform completely. The year 1939 was a standout year in Thomas Mitchell's career. Along with participating in Gone with the Wind, he appeared in several notable works, including Stagecoach, which won him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. The value in Mitchell's performance lay not in receiving vast screen time, but in his ability to craft a character that made audiences feel the broader family and historical background behind the story. Thomas Mitchell is an example showing that in epic movies, even non-central roles can enrich emotion and depth for the entire work. After over 8 decades, Gone with the Wind remains a work that audiences worldwide continue to explore, love, and discuss. The story behind the movie shows that the success of a classic work comes not only from stars on screen, but also from many people quietly contributing behind the scenes. Every decision, challenge, and creative moment contributed to an unforgettable milestone in cinema history. If you love behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to join us on upcoming journeys. Leave a comment sharing which figure impressed you most and which movie you'd like us to explore in the next video.